I'll be honest, I fucking obsess over this game, and maybe that makes me the weird one, but I've watched a lot of Let's Plays now, like a lot, and in quite a few of these Let's Plays, it sounds to me like they don't necessarily quite understand how choices work in these games, and I have a few theories as to why that could be, one of which is that I'm a genius and I know better than everyone else. And I'm gonna be working under the assumption that that is the correct theory in this video, because otherwise it's all sort of pointless. What I'm trying to say is that you can mentally add a huge I think at the end of this. I'm not trying to tell you how to play your games, this is just my interpretation. So I played through the first episode of Before the Storm, and when I finished I decided to watch a Let's Play to regain some sense of meaning in my life, and then I watched another one, and then another one. I have a lot of free time, basically. What struck me as odd was how many people seemed to genuinely believe that their choices might affect the story. For example, stealing the money from the t-shirt dude at the beginning of episode 1. When a Let's Player thinks about this choice, it'll often sound something like this.
I could pay off my debt from Frank. Or I don't want to get caught with that kind of money.
Not worth it. These guys might burn me at the stake.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, a t-shirt is one thing, but you know this game, it's all about the consequences, and I really feel like if I had taken that money, something really bad could have happened. So I'm just not about that
Nothing
life, you know?
sadder than a neglected bong.
Now, let it be known that I adored Strange Rebel Gaming's playthrough, and I understand that she really loves these games and she plays them very thoroughly, which I respect, and that's sort of why I wanted to talk about it, because the discussion seemed to be about whether or not you can get away with stealing the money, or if the consequences down the line would be too great. And that's an understandable approach, because it's what you should be thinking had this been real life. The problem with doing it here is that the inevitable conclusion you will draw is that no, it's not worth crashing someone's car and stealing their money. That's a bad idea. But you know, it's not real life, it's a video game, and you're playing a girl called Chloe, and Chloe is fucked up. She's not gonna make all the correct decisions, so if you just play the game as if your well-adjusted, reasonable, objective self was just one day dumped into Chloe's shoes, it doesn't really utilize the potential of the game properly, in my opinion. For an example of what that's like, you could watch the GT Live playthrough.
I think
Of
we
course.
play along. We play along
course.
appreciatively.
Of course, I can forgive you.
Yeah, sure.
You are so bad.
We're cool.
She's the
Thank
worst.
you. I'll make it up to you.
God, she's the worst, guys. I know you love Chloe.
Chloe,
but
is
come
this true?
on.
It's true.
Smoke. Just smoke.
It's bad for your teeth are gonna look.
You just lamented
Unfortunate.
your inability to climb up a short boat.
Right? That's not gonna help your shortness of breath.
I'm trying.
I love MatPat, but the fact that he and Steph keep playing the Life is Strange games just surprises me a little bit. I'm not gonna claim to know how they feel, but it definitely doesn't look or sound like they're enjoying themselves. And I think it stems from an inability or an unwillingness to relate to Chloe and her view of the world as an angry 16-year-old. But you need to do that, and you need to do it for all sorts of stories, right? You have to empathize with the characters on some level to be able to enjoy or at least understand them, even in a different medium. If you don't want to read books where the characters do things you wouldn't do, there's not a lot of literature left for you. And I get that it's different in a game that lets you choose how to handle its scenes, but what the choices do really is pose you a writer's challenge. And maybe that's obvious since you're literally picking the words that your character will then say, but it's a challenge that you can choose whether or not to put effort into. And if you just pick what you deem the morally correct choice every time, that's not really putting in the effort. It makes for a less interesting, less challenging gameplay experience and a worse story overall. To bring it back to the specific decision of taking or leaving the t-shirt money, I'm not saying there's no argument to be made for leaving the money with T-shirt Kun. All it requires is a clear picture of where your Chloe is mentally and what you believe she would or would not do. Obviously, this is quite early on in the game, and that would be a good excuse to not really be in her head, were it not for the fact that there's an entire, slightly worse game already made to establish her character. So in this one, you just get to steal the girl from the previous game, minus 3 years and some blue hair dye, and whatever you think that means, that's her now. And it could mean a lot of different things. If she's closer to her dad's death, that might make her more traumatized, but David isn't as big an issue yet, and Rachel hasn't left her yet, so she might be less angry as well. All the options are still available. The main flaw, as I see it, of playing the game that way, is that it requires things to change based on your choices in order to make sense. If there was any actual chance of Chloe getting caught trying to steal the money, then having to deal with the consequences, you could play it that way. But that's not how choices work in these games, like ever. Almost exclusively, they affect characters and their relationships and the dialogue in the game, but they do not have any impact on the plot at all. Which I think is fine, by the way. The games are just sort of marketed incorrectly. Like, why are there allusions to butterflies and their effects, and why is there a fucking disclaimer at the beginning of the game, like some people might not be able to tolerate the idea of consequences? That's not why it's there to convince you that there are consequences in the hope that you don't question it. But you will very quickly find out if you watch a Let's Play or play the game again making different decisions, that the same things are going to happen, it's just the dialogue that changes. And it's done really well, it's not lazy. The attention to detail is pretty impressive. I highly recommend your gamer's playthrough of episode 1 with one of the writers on the game, Zach Garris, for some insight into how many things actually can change. And yes, they're small things, but they're cool, they're all that's needed, so why does the story set up this unreasonable expectation that our choices will have real consequence to the story? They won't. And most of us know they won't. So all it does, as far as I can tell, is scare some people who don't understand how these choices work away from making some of the choices. Because, I don't know, they think Chloe might die or go to jail or whatever you imagine will happen if you steal from T-shirt Senpai. It just won't happen. It would be an insane amount of work to put into a very minor choice. If you really want consequences, there's a whole market of beautiful weeb games for you where your choices can have so much impact you need a flowchart to understand what's going on. They don't even warn you, man. Imagine that. I realize that most games with dialogue choices do these non-impact choices on some level. Let's use Dragon Age as an example. In Dragon Age, you have the option to say yes or no to becoming a Grey Warden. And if you say yes, then you become a Grey Warden. And if you say no, the other dude says fuck you, and then he makes you a Grey Warden, basically. But from there, it's actually easier to do meaningful choices in, say, a BioWare game, because they're all grand adventure, explore a galaxy or kingdom kind of games. So there's a lot of space to work with. Your character can move around a lot. That means your choices at the end of a questline in one area can have quite high impact on that specific part of the world and the people you've interacted with. Because you won't necessarily have to go back there again. You can just wander off, talk to the elves instead. The amount of impact that actually has on the game is still minimal because your character just moves location. But the impact of your decisions on the characters in that specific area is huge. People die and are possessed by demons and turn into fucking this thing. And that's all a lot harder to do in Life is Strange, which takes place in quite few locations with the same characters present from the beginning to the end of the game. In effect, that means the only really high impact decision you can have is at the very end of the game. The original Life is Strange couldn't have had the ending decision in episode 3. They'd have to make 4 more episodes worth of content instead of the 2 that they did make because the choice is so divisive. Of course, they did have what should be a high impact decision in the beginning of episode 4, if not for the whole time travel thing, when you choose to either euthanize or refuse to euthanize Chloe. I think no matter your mindset going in, you're gonna be under some pressure faced with that decision. And if you think about it for too long, I guess you might realize that you're probably not gonna stay in that reality for a long time. I didn't think about that, I just made a decision, and then when the timeline changed, I was fucking relieved, man. The decision has still been made, it'll have the same impact on Max, but Chloe doesn't die. Best of both worlds, in my opinion. But of course, in practice, the choice makes no difference. Does that take away from the moment? I don't think it does. That's all I got on the topic for now. Hopefully I can get this out before the release of episode 3. I'd like to do a separate video on the ending of Before the Storm because I have a feeling they might do some terrible, evil, cruel things. I see your hints, Deck 9, I understand your dream metaphors. I need this ship to sail, man. If the ship's good, they can do whatever they like. If not, I don't know, I'll jump off a building or something. Anyway, I'm gonna attempt to stick around. I have a few other games I want to talk about. The dialogue choice thing will probably be the gimmick. That's a feature of a lot of my favorite games and I want to talk about all of them. If that's something you're into, you can stick around. I imagine you understand how to do that if you've ever watched the end of a YouTube video before. Thanks for hanging out. Leave a comment, especially if you disagree. Bye.